Pilgrims, and welcome to another episode of the Polygon Pilgrimage. And today we're going to continue looking at my mega material here for the TerraFormer. And this will be our first look at the gas planet. There's a lot to go over here, and it is very complex, so we're going to take it slow. So this will be kind of a sub part 1 of 2 for this part, and we'll come back to it. But let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at the beginning here with the base color. Alright, so let's jump into the base color here and take a look at what I did. It's actually pretty simple, nothing too fantastic. I've been taking a couple of black and white spots, we blur it, pass it to a histogram scan, and then using the output of that, I'm taking it over into these various splatter nodes, and then blending them with two different colors, which are both controllable from the main graph. So you can change these colors of your graph, and this is just to generate a general sort of noise, background sort of look to everything, just to get us to a starting point. So if I come over here, let's take a look at the blended result of that. Looks pretty good. And now we start doing some warping here. And the warping is to start to get some of those gaseous looking controls going on. So the first directional warp here, as you can see on the bottom, comes from a Fibers 2. And this is just to start to make these kind of wavy natured artifacts coming in there. Then we come down here to our transformation 2D of a Fibers 1, and all I've done is I've rotated this. So we rotate this, bring it in here, and start to warp it a bit further. You can see that happening there. Alright, now starting to generate some cross-directional warping. And this generates some of those different winds going on with our material. And as you can see here, the two various objects we have here, a crystalline structure through a transform, and we end up with this warped kind of distorted look. And that's really great for a starting point, and that's what we're going to use to start off with. So now let's take a look at some of the base swirls here, some of the large stripes, and work into some of the finer details. Alright, so let's jump down here, and we're looking into the base swirls, and how did I get this kind of swirly nature that's going across the planetine surface. So as you can see here, I take an anisotropic noise, and what that does for us is give us just some black and white lines, sort of like a noise that's been stretched. If you think of white, old school white noise, then you stretch it. So that's what we've got going on there. And then I've warped it with a fractal sum so that we get some more breakup in here, so it's not quite so uniform. Then I needed some pockets. I needed some almost spherical interference, if you will, to generate the various wavy nature on the horizontal axes. So what I've done here is I've used the Alvidios, and by blurring that with a grayscale slope blur, you can see what we get here. And then taking that and blurring it, you can see the beginnings of that interference happening here. It's really fantastic. So now, taking that interference, we can go forward with that, and using a Gaussian 1 as our warp definition, I'm using that to warp it a little bit further. And that gives us this really nice horizontal wavy nature going on. So from there, we're going to move along a little bit here. I needed to get just a little bit further with it. So I took a plasma and I blurred it a bit. And by using that as my warp definition, you see we get even further breakup. We started with the nice kind of combed horizontal, but now I really needed some harsh noise in there to really start to break up and cause gaps. That's what we wanted, was these gaps where the various colors could blend through. Now I blend those gaps with a scratches node, and then blend those both into a high quality grayscale blur. And that's our final sort of, this is for the base swirls, just getting a generic swirl that we can use. And then further here you see we do have some stripes going on over top of that. But that is sort of the generic beginnings of our swirly, gas planetine structure. So next, let's take a look at how I made the eye storm. Alright, so let's jump down here to take a look at the gas eye storm. And this is pretty simple. For most gaseous planets, they tend to have these storms that occur on the surface. And so stepping through this, I took a Polygon 2 and simply did a couple transformations there and blended them over top of one another. And then continue that blending, I actually made a smaller one that I pushed off center on purpose to kind of get this sort of irradiated, by irradiated I mean radiated look to it. Like it starts in the center and then it kind of drifts, and that you can see over here that drifting occurring, and then blurred it out and eventually recombined it with our swirl from above to get the that push through, that blur, that warping here with the blur pushes it out. And this was just to generate an end node that we can then push into other switches, as this one here. So this switch determines whether or not you choose to have the storm as part of the final output. So it is kind of toggleable. So that's a really good feature here that we built in. Alright, and then moving along, let's go up here and take a look at our large stripe scale. So now I do have large stripes and small stripes, but I want to take a small step back and talk about the large stripe scale and how I did this here. So what I'm using here is a multi-switch grayscale, and the control for which is on the main graph. This control allows me to choose which of the 3 inputs that we're going to use here. And as you can see, all of this comes from our fibers 1 node over here, and it's just 3 different variations of that scale. And this allows us to control how many horizontal stripes we have over the whole planet surface. And that helps you determine if you want just one or if you wanted multiples. You have a little bit of flexibility there, and it's a great little node that's super easy to use. So definitely take a look at that to add some simple variety to your projects. Alright, so now let's take a look at our large stripes. So this is pretty simple. Essentially we're using a grunge map here, doing a little bit of a blurring and blending it with our stripe variations there. And once that gets blended across, doing a little bit more of a breakup to that procedure, using a moisture noise at the top there and a high quality blur. I use that to create little pockets of variation and difference. And that warp goes into our final blend here, which turned out very nice. Let's take a look at that. You see there, it turns out very well. Okay, perfect. Now, after that, what we've done here is we've taken this blend here and continued to warp it and distort it. And what that does down here, especially what I was really happy with, is the moisture noise and blurring that gives a fantastic effect. Let's go ahead and take a look in there. You can see how it starts to really get these odd patterns you can't really get any other way that I'm aware of. So that was kind of the secret there. Again, using some horizontal lines, some distortion there, and just continuing to add layers to it here. Really, that's all it is adding layers. And looking at it now, you could possibly make this a little bit more streamlined if you start to reuse some of these things. You could reuse these blurs and the moisture noises and just kind of reattach those. But you know, this is how it turned out, and I'm okay with it. And by blending all these together, we get our final mask here, and that mask is going to go over into our outputs. So next up, we're going to take a look at the small stripes. So here with our small stripes, let's go ahead and zoom in here and take a look. Again, we are feeding in from our previous nodes there to get our striations here. And very similar to the above, we're just working off of a different number of stripes here. They're smaller, thinner because of the variation, because of the number of tiles that you put into the node. You get smaller bits instead of the larger stripes. You're getting thinner stripes. So using those thinner stripes, we go through a very similar process. This looks very similar to above. I think I even copied it from above. So really, again, in hindsight, we could go back, should go back, and sort of create a function out of all of this, and then feed each of those into that function and have an output from that function that is separate. So very similar to above, really just applying the same processes to a smaller number or larger number of stripes, smaller in vertical size, but larger number of them in total. And so this is what we end up with here. Now, let's see how it works with our final outputs up here. Alright, and finally, let's take a look at our final outputs. So as you can see here, this is pretty standard fare. We have our base color or diffuse, depending on how you use it, our normal map, and we have what I'm passing through as the levels is for our roughness, our height, and our metallic. Now for the metallic, I'm using a uniform color of black because it's a gas planet. There really shouldn't be any color there. It should just be black. But what we have at the top is a blending of our original base background sort of stripy noise, and then we're adding on top of that a function there that we could and could not use for the eye, depending on what we feel like. And you can see that here. If I can move it, the recording is not catching up. Sorry, it's very big, so the recording is a little messed up. But if you see there's this curved line that's kind of dropping off very sharply to the left there off the screen, that is our curved line that connects to our function node for whether or not we're using the eye in the equation. And then as you can see, we start to put our stripes over top, and those stripes are a different color so that we can have some variation there, make sure the planet is looking nice. And we just go through a blend to add in our smaller stripes as well. And the grayscale conversion there is to turn it into a grayscale, which can be used for our normal map for our roughness. For our levels for the roughness. Normal map is generated from that because we don't really need the color information for that. And then finally the height value. And the height value I just put as a generic color for now because there's not a lot of differentials with a gas planet, not like you would for a terrain planet, where for that you have differences in height and solid mass. With a gas planet, at least for the surface that we can see from space, for our purposes here, it's sort of a combined mixture that is very smooth. So I just gave it a generic value. And then from here, all of the outputs are of course passed into our gas moon planet pass-through, and this determines whether or not you have a checkbox that determines whether or not it is a gas or a moon planet, and based upon that checkbox, it will allow one or the other of each of the inputs to pass through to the final output. So, I apologize for the choppy nature. It's been a little bit of trouble with my recording software here with this large project. I hope to have that resolved very shortly, so everything is in little pieces to get it to you guys. But I hope you have really enjoyed. This will be part 2, which will show how we made the gas planet. And next time will be part 3, where we're going to show how we make the terrain planet. So stay tuned. As always, get better, and I will see you